Tucker Carlson just had a historic sit-down interview with Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. Here's everything that you need to know, a full summary of everything that happened as quickly as we can get through it. First, Tucker starts by asking, why do you think the US might strike Russia? Putin then goes into a history of the invasions of the Russian state, referring to Mongol invasions as the Horde. And we sped all the way from the 900s to the 1400s to the 2000s. Tucker asked multiple times, why is this relevant today? And Vladimir Putin made it very clear that he wanted to see the slow dismantling of Russia, the pressure of Russia from all angles, which essentially culminated in the war against Ukraine today. See, Vladimir Putin also distanced himself multiple times from the past. He distanced himself from Lenin permitting Ukraine from leaving the USSR and becoming Ukraine, allowing the Bolsheviks to establish their independence in Ukraine. He distanced himself from that. He distanced himself heavily and multiple times from what he calls the Nazification. We'll talk a lot about that in this, of society. And he makes it very clear that he would have made different decisions and that he has one vision for Putin and for Russia. And that vision is unity. But unfortunately, he's essentially watched over not only history, but his lifetime as the Russian, either USSR or the Soviet Union, has collapsed. And every time there has been a collapse, he thought, well, maybe Russia will finally be able to negotiate a generous and beneficial relationship with other organizations or countries. He specifically points out the 1991 Soviet Union collapse, where Russia generously bestowed, those are his words, Ukraine to other parts of the world. And the collapse of the Soviet Union was led by poor Russian leaders, but now those leaders are gone, we can expect cooperation. In fact, there were even people like Egon Bahr of the German SDP, the Social Democratic Party, where a new system could be established without expanding NATO, and there could be some kind of alliance. And so Putin really distanced himself from what happened and ideas that could have been. Bahr's ideas, a new system outside of NATO, was something that could have been. But those things didn't happen. So this is where things get interesting. Putin talks essentially about how NATO expanded 5 times. And this expansion is pressure on Russia. This is on ehack.com, where I have a full summary of the entire interview, but here you could see a chart that shows you the expansion of NATO towards Russian territory. Vladimir Putin says he's not bitter, that this is not about resentment. This is instead about the expanding power of NATO, which ultimately culminated in 2014. Now, we'll touch on 2014 in just a moment, but first, consider the partnership that Vladimir Putin and George Bush almost had. In August of 2007, Vladimir Putin made a counteroffer to George Bush on a planned U.S. missile shield defense system, a joint missile defense program. Bush himself, and I have my sources on this at ehack.com, called this a very innovative plan. This was true. We fact-checked this during the time of the interview. Putin suggested we can drastically change the world if we work together. But then somehow the president's underlings essentially contributed to the deal falling apart. Vladimir Putin is basically alleging here that Putin and him were good friends, or got along at least, and that it's the system of America that wants to keep Russia an enemy, and it's that pressure that oppresses Russia. The deal fell apart, so Putin says we had to go develop our own missiles, our own hypersonic missiles. He argues things got worse when in 2008, the United States backed separatists. Background on this, okay, in 2008, Kosovo decided to declare independence from Serbia. Serbia was being supported by Russia. Kosovo was being supported by the United States. And at a NATO summit in Bucharest, the United States gave Ukraine and Georgia, the country, not the state, a membership action plan to join NATO. That obviously pisses Putin off. Putin says, what's going on? Ukraine is supposed to be a neutral state. Why weapons? Why NATO? This is not what we agreed to. And then we get into this slow-growing support for the West. Between 2005 and 2010, you have Viktor Yushchenko, who supports the West, But then that flips into another president, the fourth president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, who was president from 2010 to 2014. He was considered, or at one point was considering, open borders with the European Union. And Vladimir Putin's like, what is this? We don't want you to have open borders with the European Union, because if you do, that is going to lead to a free flow of goods between you, and that is going to hurt our free market economy. So we would have to close our border. At some point, things got tense. Viktor Yanukovych said, fine, I will support Russia. And as soon as he flips to support Russia, boom, coup d'etat. That is a military overthrow of the presidency. Vladimir Putin alleges that this was backed by the CIA. He actually goes as far as slamming Tucker Carlson for wanting to join the CIA, and then suggests it was probably a good thing that Tucker Carlson got denied. That was really sly. Tucker's face at that point was kind of like, bro, you went there. That was pretty crazy. But anyway, Vladimir Putin then says, look, we took Crimea in exchange under our protection. Okay, now obviously that's not how the West calls it. The West says Russian forces occupied Crimea to quell protests, and then the Russian government organized, illegally is what the West alleges, the Republic of Crimea, and when the Republic of Crimea was formed, then the Republic declared independence from Ukraine and Russia annexed Crimea. That's sort of their story, okay? Many countries today still see Crimea as Ukrainian. Anyway, and this is also a very strategically important location with the seaport, Sevastopol. We don't have to go into all of that. It's important, okay? Strategically, critically, everything important. So it's kind of convenient. But anyway, Putin suggests that the US backed the coup that caused this. In 2014, we then had war break out in the Donbass region. This was another phase in the Russia-Ukrainian war that came after this Crimean takeover. It started April 12th of 2014. 14,000 were killed. That was about 6,500 Russians, 4,400 Ukrainians, 3,400 civilians. So there have been tensions and issues here for a while. Vladimir Putin said, he's been asking for decades, please keep weapons out of Ukraine. We want peace. In fact, we're going to offer peace and come up with the Minsk agreements that were negotiated and settled. This was the settlement that relaxed tensions in Donbass and ended that war. However, Vladimir Putin suggests that Volodymyr Zelensky, refuses to implement the Minsk Accords. Now, Ukraine has responded to this allegation. I'm interjecting this. Ukraine has responded to those allegations and says Ukraine has always been committed to implementing Minsk. It's actually Russia who's not implementing the plan, and they're trying to make it worse by sowing instability by not implementing the plan. Putin then immediately after, I take a little pause and suggest that Ukraine is complaining that Russia's not implementing the plan. Immediately after, Putin literally says, we were ready to implement it. Okay, he didn't actually say it that way because he says it through a translator, but he did literally say, we were ready to implement it, which it kind of means he didn't implement it. So it kind of means Ukraine was right about that. So I'm like, wait a minute, so you didn't implement it? There were a couple instances like this through the interview where Putin's kind of like pooped on himself a little bit, but some of the things he said were actually very interesting. So let's keep going. He says that, I believe if we manage to bring the residents of Donbass back to Ukraine, these wounds would heal. This is a common theme of what Putin says. He actually thinks everybody's sort of just one person, that the Ukrainian people are actually Russians at heart. Now, of course, there have been studies by, for example, Pew Research that suggest Polish individuals don't like Russia, but Ukrainians, you have a lot more of a mix. You know, they say 94% of Polish individuals don't like Russia or don't support Russia, but in Ukraine, this picture is much more mixed. Now, why is this not over yet? When will the war end? Putin suggests we have to complete the denazification of Ukraine. He talks about how this was discussed in Istanbul, and he also talks about how he pulled out of Kiev, his military out of Kiev, as a way to negotiate. But wait a minute. Western point of view here says that Ukraine pushed Russia out. Russia's point of view is, no, we left as part of the negotiations. Tucker then talks denazification. Putin talks, this is very important. It's worth noting that Ukraine does have a history of collaborating with Hitler. Of course, okay? There was a lot of history between Hitler, World War I, World War II, Germany, okay, to this territory. Of course, there's a lot of history there. And yes, Zelensky is Jewish. Yes, 56 to 140,000 Jews live in Ukraine. And yes, there are Ukrainian historical figures that have monuments that have ties to Hitler. Now, the greatest modern day of Nazification that Putin alleges that that basically the world supports is that Zelensky visited Canada's parliament, and someone named Yaroslav Huntka, a 98-year-old former Nazi, gave a speech in parliament. That individual worked for a part of the Nazi party known as the Waffenschutzstaffel, the SS. This is one of the elite forces within the Nazi party, within the Nazi military wing. Waffen means weapon, okay? So the weapon SS. Schutzstaffel. Anyway, this occurred September 22nd of 2023, just a few months ago. This actually happened. What made it worse, though, was not just that that person spoke in the Canadian Parliament, which is now being referred to as a big scandal, but what made it worse was the perception, and this did actually happen, that everybody gave this individual a 2-time standing ovation. Okay. Putin then argues that he hasn't spoken with Biden since prior to his special military operation. Tucker says, why don't you just call Biden and work this out? Putin says, what's there to work out? Okay, this is very important. If there's anything y'all pay attention to, this line right here is very, very important. Subscribe. Okay, I had to do that. I'm sorry. No, this is actually very important about what Putin said. Putin said, if you want, and this is his point of view of negotiating, this becomes very relevant in a moment. Putin says, if you want to stop fighting, stop supplying weapons, then it will be over in a few weeks. Then we can negotiate. Okay. Well, wait a minute, Putin. Well, I gotta throw an interjection in here. You just said, we are willing to negotiate, but then you say, we'll negotiate after you stop giving weapons, after you stop fighting, then it will be over in a few weeks. In other words, you'll mop up what you need to, and then we can negotiate. Obviously, the United States is like, bro, then we have no leg to stand on in a negotiation. Ukraine as well, European Union and otherwise, right? I want you to keep in mind Putin's version of negotiating. This becomes very important in just a moment. Anyway, Tucker says, is NATO worried? Putin says, well, that's what they're saying. You know, NATO and the United States are trying to paint this picture that we are going to cause some kind of nuclear war. We're going to use strategic nuclear weapons. That would be stupid. We are not going to invade any other territory unless they attack us. We would only send troops to Poland if they attack us. It's absolutely out of the question. It goes against common sense to create some kind of global war because that would be bad for humanity. This is just how the West tries to extort more money from their taxpayers. American mercenaries, Polish mercenaries should not be in Ukraine. If they brought troops, this would be a global conflict. That's Putin's argument. He's not wrong. There has been a lot of warmongering. He is not wrong about that. But you ready for Putin's slam on America? This was intense. Why is America so focused on Ukraine? You have issues with the border. You have issues with the national debt. You have $33 trillion in debt. You have migrant issues at the border. Have you nothing better to do? Wouldn't it be better to just negotiate with Russia and return to common sense and respect our country? Mic drop there. That was a banger, okay? Putin hit where it hurts. Democrats and Republicans can agree on that. That hurt. Tucker then says, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? Putin obviously says, you did. Tucker says, do you have evidence? And Putin says, look, you just have to connect the dots. Who is capable of blowing up a pipeline at the bottom of the Baltic Sea? And who is interested? And he basically implies that that's the United States. Putin says it's very hard to win in the war of propaganda because the United States controls the media. In fairness, and side note, what we saw with the Twitter files kind of says there's some truth to that. Anyway, Putin then goes on to say that there is another Nord Stream pipeline that can be used. Fact check, this is also true. 4 pipelines exist. Nord Stream Pipeline 1, AB, Nord Stream Pipeline 2, AB. Pipe A of the Nord Stream 2 is inoperable. Pipe B is undamaged, and the Nord Stream 1 is offline. Damage. Putin then gets into the de-dollarization of the United States. He talks about essentially the United States using the dollar as a weapon, and this being the biggest mistake of U.S. political leadership. The dollar is a cornerstone of U.S. power, and by weaponizing it, you are weakening it. Okay, side note here. Yes, the dollar will never stop being printed by the Federal Reserve and essentially the U.S. government to strengthen whatever desires the U.S. government has. Yes, we will keep printing money, we will keep having inflation, and for as long as possible, we will be the world's reserve currency until we become until there's basically a better option. Maybe that's Bitcoin, maybe that's BRICS. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Maybe they could create another common currency. Tucker here asks, hey, well, what if BRICS is then dominated by the Chinese? Putin responds to this and says, we've heard these boogeyman stories before. We're neighbors with China. You can't choose your neighbors just like you can't choose your relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers. We have a centuries-long policy of partnership. China seeks compromise. We can compromise as well. We can work with China. It's very interesting. Putin here is drawing a parallel. He's basically saying, look, we work with China. Why can't we work with the United States? Putin is not wrong, though, about the US having a massive advantage of the money printer. This is why on this channel, I regularly talk finance and how it's important for you to get your money, your cash, into assets. Ownership in business, ownership in real estate. That's how you insulate yourself from inflation and the destruction of the dollar. I don't really care what assets you buy. You just have to get into assets that aren't dollars. Anyway, okay, continuing with the topic. So, Putin says the United States should actually cooperate more with China. Now, Putin also alleges that the United Nations is an illegitimate body. The USSR joined the United Nations in 1945, the Soviet Union in 1991, and it's worth noting that the US tried to kick Russia out of the UN, but they weren't able to. Now, a lot of people wonder, why is Russia still in the United Nations? Okay, well, remember, Russia is a P5 member of the United Nations Security Council. P5 means permanent 5. Who are the P5? China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, United States. Each have full veto power. That's why Russia stays in the United Nations. They stay in because they have power. Full veto power. One veto can overturn whatever the UN Security Council wants to do. Now, China would probably ally with Russia anyway, but Russia doesn't want to give away its power. Vladimir Putin then gets into praising Bush and, frankly, Trump. He suggests that he had a relationship with Bush and Trump, that these were not country bumpkins. Well, Bush wasn't a country bumpkin. That instead, none of these people are worse than any other politician. They know what they're doing. We had a relationship with them. It's not about demeanor. It's about the goal. Are you going to adapt or are you trying to dominate? Tucker then asks, implying that Biden is trying to dominate by instantly going to Biden. Tucker then suggests, well, who's actually running the United States? And Putin says, I have no idea. It's not possible to know. This is a slam here clearly on Biden. It's a slam on Biden, which there's plenty going on with Biden. It's a slam on Biden to suggest that Biden's not actually running America right now, that the underlings in the Biden administration are the ones actually running the country, potentially led by people on boards at like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whatever who are supporting the military-industrial complex. I don't know. Those are allegations, obviously, from some. Not everybody agrees with that. The flip side says, whoa, we're just spending money where we think it will defend American lives. Okay? Everybody has to make their own conclusion on that. Anyway, Vladimir Putin gets into how he's constantly pressured from all sides. NATO expanding and the supplying of weapons is unacceptable. And ultimately, we need to have a negotiated solution. He suggests that he is willing to negotiate, and he dodges the question of if he would be satisfied with the territory that he has now. It might not necessarily have been a dodge, though. It might be because he just wants less pressure on Russia. He suggests that he's just protecting ourselves. He's protecting the Russian motherland. He then gets into talking about how ultimately he thinks the Russians and Ukrainians will be united, that there will be a solution eventually, and that religion will bring everyone together. That religion is in your heart. It's not about banging your head against the ground. It's about what's in your heart. It's also, Putin mentions this, important to question, why would Orthodox churches be shut down in Ukraine? This is where Putin is basically trying to salt the Ukrainian defense, to argue like, wait, do they actually want to unify? Are they actually sincere in their negotiations? When Vladimir Putin is asked by Tucker Carlson, hey, well, what's it going to take to negotiate? Putin kind of gives up here. Putin says, look, we tried to negotiate. We initialed many parts of a deal in Istanbul. We withdrew from Kiev. We've tried to negotiate. But Boris Johnson came in and tore up the negotiated plan and told Russia or told Ukraine not to sign the deal. We almost had a deal 18 months ago, and now it's evaporated. Who is supporting this? Is it the US? Is it the United Kingdom? We've been willing to negotiate. When you're ready to negotiate, you come to us. That's how Putin left off with negotiate. Now, to be clear, remember how I told you to remember something very important earlier when I told you to subscribe, okay? Putin says, you come to us when you're ready to negotiate. But Putin also said, in order to negotiate with me, you all have to stop fighting, stop supplying weapons, and after a few weeks, after we end this, presumably mop everything up, then we'll negotiate. So I kind of got two Putins there. I got the Putin that's like, yeah, I'm ready to negotiate. Come anytime, I'm ready. And then I got, I'm not ready to negotiate unless you basically lose. Okay, all right. Anyway, there was a little bit of talk about Elon Musk, about how Elon is a very smart man, that, Putin heard he just implanted a chip into some person's brain, and that genetics and AI are all going to be really big risks in the future. They'll probably be regulated just like nuclear weapons were, because once people realize there are threats to their own humanity, they end up regulating it. Just like they did with nukes, they'll end up doing with genetic engineering, and they'll end up doing with AI. Now, Tucker Carlson pulled a really 4D chess move towards the end of the interview. He said, will you release the jailed Wall Street Journal reporter? This was brilliant for two reasons. Number one, if he got the reporter released, Tucker Carlson would be a national hero. Number two, even if he didn't get the reporter released, he tried, and he tried hard. That is a way of warming up the mainstream media to like Tucker Carlson, because the mainstream media does not want to see one of their reporters in jail in Russia. It's a 33-year-old named Evan. He worked for the Wall Street Journal. Still works for the Wall Street Journal, theoretically, presumably. Anyway, Vladimir Putin says this individual was not just a reporter. They conducted espionage. We caught the individual red-handed, and we'll probably come up with some kind of solution, and it'll be win-win for everybody, but we're not there yet. Okay, there you go. That is a complete summary of everything that happened in this interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. If you like this, please consider subscribing. I do breakdowns like this regularly. I go live every morning. The stock market is open on the Stock Market Open live stream channel. Just type into YouTube, Meet Kevin Stock Market Open. There'll also be a redirect link at the end of this live stream. And I do breaking news, and I cover topics like what happened at the Supreme Court today. I covered all of that in detail. I talk stocks, real estate, finance, you name it. Thank you so much for being here. Keep in mind, I also covered the J6 live stream straight for like 10 or 12 hours. That was crazy, but I never had 150,000 concurrent viewers. Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.